will be up in the upper right. You can change how you're viewing things. So you might have to minimize the people or go full screen.
What is liberation? That's the title of this Dharma talk. As I began to prepare for it, I began to realize this is way too long for one Dharma talk. So this is going to, my thought is to have the next few Dharma talks to be around this particular question. And I'd like to look at perspectives from what we call the so-called East and so-called West. Now, keep in mind, as I share what I'm about to share, that this is my particular understanding, and it's by no means a complete view of East and West. It's only what I have come to see. And I'm basing it on particular readings, my understanding of particular cultures. And again, it's a somewhat it's a small view. So if we keep that in mind as we're considering these different views, I would appreciate that. It's just the way to be respectful for people who are may have a different view than what I'm presenting. So this is an overview. This is an overview of what I want to share. And it kind of starts on the left side of the screen there with what I call Indian culture. The Indus Valley civilization is the origins of Indian culture, and what's been called Hinduism. This is kind of the foundation of Buddhism, early Buddhism. So there's a kind of transition here to early Buddhism, and then early Buddhism transitions to what we call the middle way teachings that appear in Buddhism. And then you have a third transition as Buddhism transmigrates from an Indian culture, Indian continent, to China, Korea, and Japan. And then we see Zen is a Japanese word. It's not a Chinese. Chan would be the Chinese word for it. But we're looking at Taoism and Confucianism. These are unique to China, and their expressions are different based on Chinese culture versus Japanese culture. So I think it's really important, if we're going to understand liberation, all of these different circles here have different ideas of what liberation is. And Zen is going to have a combination, I believe, of all of these three, or it's the compilation, where it's the accumulation of ideas around liberation come together in Zen. And then you have this other thing happening as East meets West in the past century or so, where the Asian influence on Western minds, European descent minds, white American descent minds, people who have been kind of indoctrinated and steeped in what's called the Abrahamic traditions. So you have this meeting taking place today of East and West, right? So what happens here in this as Zen Buddhism kind of connects or meets Abrahamic religion? This isn't like I don't see this as an external thing happening. I see it as something happening within myself.
Can I interrupt?
And I'd suggest for yourselves as well, because I think all of us here, being brought up in United States, we come from a particular religious tradition and cultural background that incorporates ideas from within the Abrahamic religions into our way of living. We think through that particular lens. And so as we come together, as we begin practicing Zen, there's going to be a meeting. There's a meeting place here. There's things that are different. There's things that can be amplified in this meeting. It's a rich time. It's a rich place for us as practitioners as we grapple with these differences all coming together. And we have this the benefit of practice. By practice, I mean we have the benefit of sitting with the contradictions that we experience today. And I want to contrast that with the reality that so many of us are faced with, where we don't have a container. I see practice as a kind of container with which to hold diversity of opinion. And a lot of people are, I think, must be struggling internally, perhaps mentally, trying to get our minds around all of this influx of perspectives. It's just inundated with perspectives on what is liberation, or type in what question you have on the internet and you'll get a million hits on how to respond to that. And we have to kind of filter through what's the right one. So this is a time where practice, if we can see practice as a way to connect with our intuition. Because if we're just connecting with the external world and the so-called objective information that we have before us, and not connecting with our intuition that's giving us information, then we're probably going to make decisions that we regret. So connecting both with the data as well as what is our intuition saying about the data we're receiving. So part one is to be able to open our doors to various ways of thinking and being. Part two is to connect with our own intuitive sense of what is right for us, for us in particular. So that's kind of the big picture view of what I'd like us to look at these next few sessions. And I'm recording this. I'll record the future one, so if you can't come for it, it'll be there. So let's narrow this down. We're gonna go back to this first arrow here, Hinduism, Indian culture, and look at that.
Can I make a comment?
Just step back in time, step back in history, but also stepping into a way of seeing that is still very, very present for a good chunk of the world. Right? So we want to look at the origins of Buddhism. Where does Buddhism come from? And what are some of the concepts that have influenced Buddhism before the Buddha even took his present incarnation? So one concept that we need to kind of grapple with is this concept called samsara. It's foreign, I think, to the Abrahamic faiths. The Abrahamic traditions don't talk about samsara in the same way. Well, let's just say the samsara as a concept does not exist, as far as I'm aware of, in the Abrahamic traditions. It's an Indian word, and it's referring to this cycle of life and death. And it's assuming another concept that you don't find at least explicit in the Abrahamic traditions, and that is this idea of reincarnation, that we transmigrate from one birth, death to the next birth, death. We're constantly coming, it's like we're popping in and out of existence. We're popping in and we're popping out, popping in, popping out. And we've been here since the beginning of time. And this popping in and popping out is something that the sages, the ancient sages, pre-Buddha, were looking for a way out of. They wanted to end the cycle. So the cycle of birth and death was referring to ending cyclic existence over the span of not just one's life, but one's reincarnations, and ending that cycle of birth and death. Right? So this is an important concept to kind of get our minds wrapped around, is that pre-Buddha Indian thought was about how do I get out of this continual cycle of birth and death. Another word that was used is, or that may still be used, is moksha, this release or liberation from the cycle of existence. That was what's considered liberation. That is, and for many people, that is still what is considered liberation. How do I get out of this cycle of suffering? How do I stop being reborn? That is, and was a motivating factor for the spiritual journey. And we have to realize, when we study Buddhism and when we study Zen, we've got to see that is operating in the texts that we read. It's operating in why we do meditation. Now, we'll get to this part later, but Zen kind of comes at it from a different angle. There's a different nuance that begins to take place with the Buddha. But let's continue to move into the idea, the concepts here of samsara, and the ideas that were floating around the Indian subcontinent prior to the Buddha. So if your question was, how do I get out of this cyclic existence? How do I get out of samsara? One way that the sages have come to conceive the end of cyclic existence is through these two terms you see on the board here on the slideshow: Atman and Brahman. Atman and Brahman. So Atman is this supreme self. And if we look, I'm going to share with you a quote from the Upanishads about the Atman. If we look at it closely, we can see how is the Atman defined? And then the other word is Brahman. So this is, again, this is just one tradition within. Hinduism is a vast collection of ways of seeing the world. And this is coming at it from what's called monism. It's a non-theistic perspective. This Atman, Brahman. Brahman having to do with, I hesitate to give a definition, but maybe universal reality, maybe life as it is, or maybe the entire cosmos, Brahman, and the life force that generates this cosmos, maybe something like that. Okay, so we have these two concepts that we're wrestling with. Atman is something seated within the heart of every individual. And it's considered that which is imperishable, that which cannot be destroyed. And this Atman is what transmigrates from one lifetime into the next, from one physical body. So the body perishes, but the Atman at the center of the heart continues to move to the next body. It picks up the next body, and then it picks up the next body. And it's had countless bodies, countless lives in the past. And the realization of the sages is that this Atman is identical with Brahman. Okay, that's kind of the thing. But let's hear, I'll give you a definition here. This is from the Katha Upanishad of the Atman, the self. Another way of talking about the self with a capital S, big S self, hidden away in the heart of every creature exists the Atman, the self, subtler than the subtlest, greater than the greatest. There are two ways to think about this particular phrase. One is from a philosophical angle, and one is from a contemplative angle. The philosophical angle is going to emanate from the brain, from the head. It's going to be thinking about, it's going to be conceptualizing things. The contemplative perspective on this is going to be looking at this and feeling the Atman in the heart. Subtler than the subtlest, greater than the greatest. In the heart of every creature. And we can do both. We can do this from a philosophical angle, but we can also do it from a contemplative angle. And I want to suggest that this Atman, if we look at it from the contemplative angle, this is a possible object of meditation, right? To see or to feel the heart and that Atman, to know that it exists in us as something that which is imperishable, exists within our heart. This is something we can actually contemplate and take refuge in. We can actually take refuge in that Atman because it's imperishable, it's eternal, according to the Upanishads. They go beyond all sorrow who extinguish their self-will and behold the glory of the big self, the Atman, through the grace of the Lord of love. They go beyond all sorrow who extinguish their self-will. I think I had this on a different slide. When the wise realize that the Atman, formless in the midst of forms, changeless in the midst of change, omnipresent and supreme, they go beyond sorrow. So here's a really deep motivation for contemplating Atman. Because this Atman, according to this definition, Atman is in the midst of the form, the world of forms, the world of objects. This is something that is formless. In the midst of the world, this world of constant change and fluctuation, there is something changeless. I mean, don't we want to take refuge in that which is changeless when our world is turned upside down? Always present and supreme is this self, this Atman. And if we take refuge in it, we go beyond sorrow. Who doesn't want to go beyond sorrow? This is a strong motivation. It's a strong motivation. So coming at this from a contemplative angle, we can find that which is changeless, which is permanent, right? Formless in the midst of form within ourselves. They go beyond all sorrow who extinguish their self-will and behold the glory of the self through the grace of the Lord of love. So here, this is an interesting, kind of an interesting passage. Just to separate these two out. They go beyond all sorrow who extinguish their self-will. So the path then is according to this particular Upanishad, is letting go or releasing ego, self-will. I want it this way. It's got to be like this, right? It's got to be my way or no way. This makes a lot of sense. We find this theme in all the world religions: releasing, letting go of ego, right? Letting go of whatever brings rise to anger, whatever brings rise to anxiety, to fear. Releasing that. And if we can do that, we behold the glory of this Atman, this self. And it happens not just through our own will, it happens through grace. What a beautiful word. I love that word, grace. It happens through grace, through the grace of the Lord of love. There's no name given here. It just says the Lord of love. Through the grace of the Lord of love, that's how self-will is extinguished. What a beautiful line. And further it says, though one sits in meditation in a particular place, the Atman within can exercise his or her influence far away. Though still she or he moves everything, everywhere. This is hard to get our minds wrapped around. But if even in sitting in meditation, we're not in control. You know, this is pointing to there's something more that is, you know, what is the life force that allows us to sit up, that allows us to hear, to see, to breathe, to experience our body? That is not caused or created by us sitting in meditation. That's always there. So it doesn't matter what we're doing, that Atman is giving us life. And this is kind of my funny writing here, but this word here on the left says wave. This wave is kind of a pictorial. This is the wave on the ocean. And our life is like, this is our birth. At one end, it rises up, the height of the wave, and then it drops down, or death goes into the next life, up and down, like a wave on the ocean. And the insight that the sages had or have is that this Atman, this wave, is simultaneously the ocean itself. So wave and ocean are not two separate things. So where do we disappear to when there is death, birth, and death, and birth? We're always connected to this greater reality. And so this body-mind that you're experiencing in this lifetime is a manifestation of one wave on the ocean of reality. And we have an expansion, just like our breath. As we breathe in, we expand, and our life expands. It comes to a peak, and then it contracts, and it disappears, just like our breath. On the breath level, we expand and contract in every moment. And on the physical level, our physical body expands and contracts. On the mental level too, it expands and contracts. On the life force level, our life force is expanding and contracting. We're not in charge of the wave. We have the illusion of being in charge. Now, to bring this back to Buddhism, this idea of no self, there's more here to go into, so I'll save that for another talk. But consider how the Buddha's teaching, this kind of throws things a little bit off, at least from a philosophical perspective, but not necessarily a contemplative perspective. So if we're looking at this from a philosophical perspective, we'll be thrown off. If we look at it from a contemplative perspective, it may not shake us at all. But one of the things that the Buddha taught is what you see on the bottom here, the 3 marks of existence, and the last one is anatman. Anatman means no Atman. This is what the Buddha taught, no Atman. And that's a central teaching to Buddhism. So prior to Buddhism, there's this teaching of Atman, and that teaching of Atman is still alive and very well. The Buddha comes along and he has a different nuance. He says there is no Atman, and this is the word is anatman. So I want to pause there and give us something to maybe think about, chew on a little bit for the next hour. we have a little bit more zazen, and when we come back at the end, we can have a little discussion if you would like to talk about this. But you know, this is part one, so we'll dig into this a little bit more the next talk. All right. Thank you. Let's see here.